Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
Located on Lake Pontchartrain, Brisbee's Lakefront Restaurant and Bar offers traditional West End favorites, a scenic view, oysters, and numerous tasty options. More information is available at 504-304-4125 or brisbeesrestaurant.com. Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House has been shucking here since 1979. Located at 3117 21st Street in Metairie, Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House offers raw, fried, and grilled oysters as well as a range of Cajun and Creole dishes. Enjoy a dozen with a smile.
Welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. My name is Eric Asher. Thanks so much for being with us this evening, and we got another great show for you. Great panel. We'll talk about the Saints, LSU, Pelicans. We'll also talk a bit about Tulane if we get a chance tonight. But again, as always, we'll go to our panel and tell them a little bit about what's happening here. Les East, freelance journalist, award-winning journalist, is with us tonight, along with Brett Martel, the Associated Press. Both these guys cover all the teams here in the metropolitan area. And gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being with us. Les, congratulations on your Press Club Award. And if you would, tell the folks a little bit about what you're involved in.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate that. The award I won was for sportsnola.com, which is a forum I've really been privileged to write for most of the last 9 years. And people have probably noticed that we're going through a transition period now, but we're excited that come August 1st, it's going to be back up under a new name to be announced. Mm-hmm. So we'll leave a little drama there for the audience, but it should be as good, if not better than before. Everything people are used to finding there: Prep, LSU, Tulane, UNO, Saints, Pelicans. So looking forward to getting back in the swing with them on August 1st.
Well, and if you have not checked out the former sportsnola.com, it's, I guess, a collection of some of the best writers that we've got in the city that have covered sports in New Orleans for a long, long time. So when they relaunch this, I would, again, ask you to be able to check it out. And as we've done all along, we're going to have a lot of those guys on our program as well. Brett Martel writes for the Associated Press. Brett, welcome back to the show, as always. Can I say award-winning as well? You got an award or two in your...
Yeah, in my career. This is 22 years, but nothing recently.
There you go. But tell us a little bit about the Associated Press.
Well, AP is a worldwide news organization based in New York, and I am based in New Orleans full time, and I cover all the major sports in this area, in Louisiana. So.
Yeah, which is, again, I mean, when you're talking about doing what you do, it's everything. I mean, you're going LSU, Saints, golf, Pelicans, and at times news. And in the past, you've done news in the past as well. Gentlemen, thanks for coming down tonight. We always appreciate having you. And we'll start off with the Pelicans. Again, a lot of rumors out there on how they're going to fill out this roster. The two latest rumors that we've heard today, Dell Demps, Alvin Gentry met with Rajon Rondo, former Kentucky star. Again, looking probably for a small deal, maybe a couple of years. Not looking for the big max deal that, again, a lot of guys out there are getting. Pelicans don't have a lot of room right now to be able to add players. It'll be interesting to see how this goes. The other rumor was that the Pelicans were in negotiations with the Detroit Pistons to be able to acquire Reggie Jackson, former Oklahoma City Thunder, signed a 4-year, $80 million deal with the Pistons last year. Stan Van Gundy, probably at this point, maybe a little buyer's remorse on that, and has about 3 years and $51 million left on that deal, with an average of about $16.5 million per year. Again, which you add that to the already top-heavy Pelicans salary cap, and again, you're looking at the very, very hard for the Pelicans to fill out this roster with quality players. Anyway, the players that are rumored to be sent to Detroit, if this trade is consummated, will be Quincy Pondexter, who hasn't played in a couple years, and his 1-year, $3 million salary, E'Twaun Moore, and his 3-year, $26 million salary, and Alexis Agenza and his 2-year, $10 million salary. For me, the big question is, again, why not Omer Sheik? And again, his ridiculous salary of 3 years left and about $30 million. Again, or Solomon Hill and his salary as well. So again, that's the rumor mill right now. Now, again, as far as Jackson goes, he missed 20 games last year with knee tendonitis, and the salaries have to match in the NBA. So they may have to use a trade exception or two that they've gotten in trades. The real recent one with Tim Frazier going to the Washington Wizards, a $2 million trade exception to make this work, or some draft choice to make this work if they are to go with Reggie Jackson. Guys, I'll turn to you now. Reggie Jackson, Rajon Rondo, going with a guy that's got 3 years left on his deal at about 16 per, knowing you have to sign Boogie Cousins back, knowing you've given Drew Holiday 5 years, $126 million, an average of $25 million a year. And of course, we know that Anthony Davis is making about $25 million a year. You expect next year, no matter whether Boogie Cousins is here or elsewhere, he's going to make well over $20 million a year as well. So the Pelicans are in a little bit of a quandary now because they don't have a lot of money under the cap to fill out this roster with quality players.
Yeah, if one of the options was to get the Rajon Rondo, who was with the Celtics 5 or 6 years ago, it'd be something to really get excited about. Of course,
and he played well in the playoffs for the Bulls until he got injured.
Mm-hmm. So the veteran leadership would be helpful, but this is a problem they have gotten themselves into. Is there's good and bad with both of these options. Rondo gives him the veteran presence. I think he would probably be a good guy to have around to help Frank Jackson learn the ropes in the NBA. And he could help upgrade this team right away. The problem is the main thing they have to do next year is convince DeMarcus Cousins to re-up long-term, presumably after the season when his contract expires. And Rondo's not really the guy who's part of your long-term future. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure, even if he helps next year, that he sells Cousins on being here for the long term. So Reggie Jackson being younger probably helps more in that regard in saying, hey, we're putting some pieces around you and Anthony Davis and Drew Holiday. This is where you want to be. But you're taking on a pretty bad contract if you do that. So, it's a double-edged sword in both cases. Probably for the short term, Rondo would be the better option of the two, but you have to keep in mind what's going to sell DeMarcus Cousins on the long-term future, as well as Anthony Davis. Yes. So it's kind of difficult. And right now, these are the kind of deals you're going to see if you're trying to trade, because the top free agents are gone, so you're getting lower-tier free agents, or you're trying to work a trade in which everybody's trying to unload their worst contracts.
Yes.
So, but they got to add some talent, especially in the backcourt and on the wings. So they have to do something, and they don't have great options.
And that's with an NBA salary cap that's stagnant now at $99 million, $99 million for this year, and not expected to go up much at all next season, despite what they thought maybe 2 years ago. And again, one of the reasons why Dell Demps maybe overpaid a bit for Ejuan Moore, overpaid a bit for Solomon Hill, figuring the cap would continue to expand and there would be more cap room. I think a lot of general managers and capologists got a rude awakening this year when the revenue was not as high as they thought it would be, or at least they anticipated it would be. Your thoughts on Jackson, your thoughts on Rondo?
Rondo seems to me like the safer bet at this point, just financially. And I don't know, you're right in that in some ways having Jackson would show Cousins more of a long-term commitment, but I think it might also make it harder for the Pelicans to fill out the roster around what they view their big three is with really competent role players. I think what they really want to do is just figure out a system that really is effective with Cousins and Davis, who are versatile bigs, and they
Absolutely.
can they have range. Cousins is apparently getting in better shape, losing some weight, trying to work on being quicker. Hopefully not just standing there and shrugging his shoulders after he misses a shot, looking for a foul while he should be getting back on defense.
Yes, or fouling his shot.
Yeah. And so they have, and Holiday, obviously, I think they looked at Holiday as really the long-term commitment from Holiday as the key to getting Cousins to see how committed they were. So when you look at Rondo's veteran experience, the fact that they can probably get him cheaper for short-term things, see how it works out, the fact that he has the Kentucky connection, it probably makes the most sense in that regard. And it also would allow them to see if Quincy Pondexter's comeback is realistic or not. I mean, they love him personally. They've stuck with him for a long time.
Great guy, but
they stuck with him for a long time. And I saw him practicing off by himself at the end of last season, which was a hopeful sign that he might actually be able to, for the first time in 3 years, give it a shot in this training camp.
Les, when you look at this, they're really in a tough spot right now because, as I've mentioned before, you're very, very top-heavy on the cap. Right now, it looks like Check Diallo and Quinn Cook will come in and play backup roles for you. Cook, obviously, both Cook and Diallo have played well in the Summer League. We know the Summer League is light years away from the NBA. Just because someone performs well in the Summer League doesn't mean that they're going to bring those same stats, be able to do that in the NBA. But again, when you look at those two, you can say Cook at this point is a guy that can score the basketball. He has the ability to be able to handle. He can pass the basketball. Now, again, he's going to have to be able to be more of a floor general and can't implode like he did a few times in the early Summer League games. He kind of cleaned that up. Diallo's gotten better. For a guy that was 1 year at Kansas, hadn't played a lot of basketball, he's got the athletic ability. He's worked on his shot. He's got a mid-range jumper now. You see the athleticism. You love the hustle because, I mean, there's a guy that's going to go end line to end line for you in terms of defense and rebounding. And again, maybe not the shot blocker they thought he was, but still, again, a guy that's going to give you some energy off the bench. So again, more than likely, those two guys on minimum deals will fill out the roster, but you still need a shooter. And you need multiple shooters, and you're in a situation now where, again, they're getting very, very close to the cap, and they can go over the cap some by signing their own players. But at this point, I don't think Mr. Benson is willing to be a taxpayer and go over the luxury tax threshold at this point. Maybe a couple of years from now, he may be forced to because they're so top heavy on the salary cap. But as of right now, for a team that hasn't even made it to the playoffs to pay a luxury tax, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, it doesn't. And if I were Tom Benson, I wouldn't want to pay the luxury tax unless it was something that was going to put me over the threshold to being a legitimate championship contender.
Yes.
They're a long way away from there, so that it doesn't make sense to go into a luxury tax just to maybe become the 7th or 8th team in the West and get knocked out in the first round. So economically, it doesn't make any sense. As far as Diallo, the one encouraging thing, you're right about the Summer League. You got to take all that with a huge grain of salt.
Yes.
Generally, I think in the NBA and the NFL, one of the times that players make the biggest leap in terms of development is from year 1 to year 2. So you would hope that he's one of those guys who, having gone through 1 year in the NBA, is ready to take a big leap forward. But there's certainly no guarantees there. But they have to find shooters. And like you said, multiple shooters. And so, you wish you had a program, everybody wishes they had a program like the Spurs. Mm-hmm. But one of the keys is they're going to have to do stuff internally. Yes. They're going to have to develop young players to become much bigger impact players than maybe their resumes would suggest. The Spurs do that very well. I'm not sure that you can really count on the Pelicans being able to do that at this point.
You see, Les, but the problem is that how do you develop young players if you're trading away lottery picks and you're going after second-round picks and then, again, the upper echelon of the now G League? Because that's how they filled out the back end of their roster now. The giving up on using the first-round picks as assets to be able to try to bring in other players, veteran players, because they want to try to get a shortcut to a championship. But when you're filling out that roster, now you're not developing players anymore. You're not developing a first-round pick that again, is going to be with you 4 or 5 years, and you're going to see dividends maybe after 2 or so years. And I get it. 19-year-old, that's a tough deal right now in terms of having a 19-year-old come in and immediately make an impact in the NBA. But that's been the flaw if there is a plan with Dell Demps up to this point.
Yeah, it's a problem in that, as you pointed out, is they're not getting elite players through the draft because they've mortgaged the future by trading off those number 1 picks. And then they don't, at least to this point, have not had the personnel who can develop players who are coming toward the end of the draft. So it's a problem with player acquisition and player development, and it's one that they've had for a while, and it's put them in the position they're in now.
Yeah, no doubt. Brett, what can you add?
Well, I mean, that's Dempsey's philosophy, and you kind of have to live with it. I mean, he wants known quantities over, potential. Anthony Davis was a consensus overall #1 pick, so he was kind of a known quantity as a 19-year-old, and he seems to have developed fine. First team All-NBA, 3-time All-Star.
But a lot of the development under Monty Williams.
Right, yeah, that's true. Now they have Frank Jackson. I think the risk-reward on him is favorable because you were able to get him in the second round, and he's the kind of player that a lot of people feel like, well, he might have had first-round talent, but he was young, he had an injury, but he still was able to average, over 12 points a game in the games he started at Duke, and I think 10.9 for the whole season. And Krzyzewski had really good things to say about him. So that's a guy that might have potential to give you that kind of development that you're hoping for from a young player, and the fact that they're giving him 2 years guaranteed. Which a lot of second-round contracts aren't guaranteed at all, and you got to make the team in your first training camp. I think, demonstrates that they have some confidence in him.
Right, and of course, the 2 years guaranteed is they split the mid-level exception, which is normally used for a veteran player, to bring a veteran player in. Because they had cap constraints, they had no choice but, again, to be able to hold on to him as a prospective talent, to ultimately, again, split that mid-level exception and give him a partial mid-level exception, again, to guarantee the first 2 years of the deal. The third year is not guaranteed. Interesting how they found Frank Jackson. And Alvin Gentry was telling this story during one of the Summer League broadcasts. They went to Durham to see Drew Holiday because Holiday was working out in Durham at Duke. And ultimately, again, as he was working out with the Duke team. Jackson was on the floor, and Jackson impressed Dell Demps and Alvin Gentry with his athleticism, the way he handled himself on the court against other players, including pro players. And again, they kept their eye on him. When he fell out of the first round, that's why, again, they moved up so quickly to get him, because they pretty much had a scouting report and a book on him. They liked him from the beginning. And look, the kid's got a great upside, but he's 19 years old, and he's a boy. He's a young man, but you're going to be playing against grown men, and that's the big difference.
Yeah, there are going to be growing pains, I guess literally and figuratively, with him. But I will say this about the draft. When you look at them going into the draft with the 51st pick or something before they made the trades.
They started with the 40th and the 51st.
Right. Yeah. And the maneuvering they made to get up, to identify him and make the trade and grab him, I think they came out of the draft better than you would have expected before they made the two trades. Now, they did give up Tim Frazier, who was a decent asset, but at the same time, they came out of it pretty well. So I give them credit for making the move to get a young guy with a lot of potential. But he's a long way from being an impact player. Hopefully it works out for him, but that'll probably be down the road a bit.
And Frazier was a salary dump. Simply to be able to, again, for cap reasons, and to get that trade exception, which is another chip when they're trying to be able to, again, bring in veteran players. It'll be interesting to see how he develops. Again, within the next year or so, the Pelicans will have their own G League team, which will allow them to be able to send players down to a farm league team that will run the same system as the parent team, instead of, again, floating between multiple teams that are really part of maybe another organization. And then the new salary now that will allow them to be able to have a player on the team that goes back and forth from the G League. That will help, obviously, in bringing in players. But let me tell you, guys, I don't know how they fill the rest of this roster out, but they cannot afford injuries, because injuries at the top of that roster will hurt them, because at that point, it's going to be what it's been over the last few years. You're going to turn to D-League/G League players to come in and fill the void on your roster, because you don't have a lot of money.
Yeah, and Anthony Davis, unfortunately, has been a guy who, I hate to use the term injury prone. I think that implies an unfair negative connotation, but nonetheless, he's a guy who's missed a lot of time, partly because of the way he plays. And to lose him or Cousins or Holiday for any period of time is really going to expose just how thin this roster is. And like we've talked about, that there's not a whole lot they can do to upgrade that roster at this point.
Brett, Drew Holiday, 5 years, $126 million, averaging about $25 million per year. Could be as much as $30 million with incentives. I mentioned it on last week's show. I've mentioned it on the radio show. Man, I thought the cap hold of almost $17 million was a little high. You look at where the salaries are right now, you say 17 to 19 million, probably about right for Drew Holiday, because again of the sins of the past of this cap. They had to overpay for him, and they overpaid for him handsomely. You know, maybe about $5 or $6 million more per year than maybe what he'd be worth on the open market. Your thoughts on this deal?
It's a little risky, but they are betting that his best basketball is ahead of him, which is a reasonable presumption because he's still young. He's 27. He didn't play a lot 3 seasons and 4 seasons ago because of leg injuries that persisted really because of the head of the screw. When they fixed it the first time, it caused the irritation. They had to go back in and kind of shave that down, and that delayed his comeback. But he's been in really good shape in his lower body for the two years running. So he's still relatively young. I mean, because 2 years ago was actually the eye injury.
Yeah, we got the elbow, yes.
Yeah, and that's kind of a freak thing. So, you know, he's going to have his first full training camp in, what is it, like 4 years?
Yeah.
And ideally it would be a full training camp with Davis and Cousins, a trimmed down kind of new look Cousins too.
Yes.
Those are all the reasons that you can be optimistic about this. And, you know, now he has the experience. So Drew Holiday has health, he has experience. He's going to have more time to develop chemistry with Cousins. He has good chemistry with AD. It could pay off.
Yes.
But, you know, it's just that, I mean, he really does have to be the best he's ever been in order for it to pay off. And if he's not, then it's a bust.
No, it is. It is. And look, let's go back to the entry. You know, I had Scott Kushner on the program this week. He's the beat writer for The Advocate, and he mentioned the Pelicans were as much as at fault as Drew Holiday as rushing him back a little bit earlier than they should have, which again delayed him with that foot injury, which again ultimately put him back in where he couldn't play anymore because they rushed him. So the Pelicans got to take a little bit of that on them. But what are your thoughts on this deal? Because as Brett mentioned, it is a little bit of a roll of the dice. You are really hurting yourselves in terms of cap flexibility. And he's moving to a new position. He's going to be playing the off guard. You know, again, he may have to play the point guard ultimately if they can't find a point guard. But again, they would prefer him to play the off guard. So a new position as well.
Yeah, I think he'll probably wind up playing both positions. If they get Rondo or Jackson, he'll probably play more off guard than point guard, which is one way of addressing the wing problem, although not the ideal way of addressing it, but nonetheless it gives them somebody else playing off the ball who can score from the perimeter at least a little bit.
And can move. Right. Pick and roll, that's another part of his game.
Yeah, and if you have a dependable point guard that allows you to do that, then it makes your backcourt better. So I think they had to bring him back, and I think we talked on the show before free agency began, and I was a little leery of giving him max money. I think the contract they worked out was better than I feared they might wind up with. But I'm not sure it's an ideal contract. But at this point, they had to do whatever they could to keep him, I think. Because if they'd let him go in free agency, then they still didn't have a ton of money to spend. They would have had more. But then you got a huge hole to fill just to get to where they are now, trying to fill in the other spots. So I think they had to make the deal, and I think they made a reasonably good one. And, you know, this is a team that, you know, now I think is a more of a legitimate playoff contender than it might have been at the end of last year, but not much more than that.
Yeah, and of course, as it's been mentioned over and over again by everybody that covers this team, they were kind of handcuffed to him at this point because of the salary cap. They didn't have a lot of money to spend if they didn't sign him because of the way the cap is set up. So again, they were almost in a position where they were forced to, but they definitely didn't get the hometown discount, that's for sure. There's no doubt about that. Despite the fact that he said he loved New Orleans and he didn't want to go anywhere else, there was no hometown discount. And you know, his brother didn't come with him either. And that was the big rumor. There was going to be a package deal. Ultimately, he ended up signing with Chicago. Darius Miller comes back. Guys, I talked about it a little bit last week. I love Darius Miller coming out of Kentucky. I really thought that he was going to be a real solid player, I think, for the then Hornets. But But again, he really did kind of fizzled out in the NBA. He goes over to Germany. He plays for the German Pro League, Borussia Bamberg. They won their third straight Belco BBL championship. In 2016, he was the Finals MVP for that team. Supposedly, he refined his game. He is, again, a more willing shooter. He was a little bit almost gun shy when he was in the NBA the last time. But the numbers don't jump out at you. You know, when you think of an NBA player going over to Europe and playing, you're expecting the guy to be able to get 30 points, 10, 15 rebounds, maybe 6, 7 assists a game, 12, 4, and 3. I mean, that's not setting the world on fire when you start talking about, the average. Now, he did shoot 58% from 3, but it'll be interesting to see what type of player Darius Miller is coming back here, because quite frankly, they don't have a lot of money, so they may be forced to have him on this roster as a guy who could be one of those quote-unquote shooters.
Yeah, I don't think he's really a big part of the solution to the shooting problem. He's going to be a role player. I think there's a pretty good chance he makes the team. What I do like about him, he had a lengthy career at Kentucky, so he was used to winning in college. Even though it didn't work out for him in the NBA initially, when you go to Germany, MVP in the finals, won 3 championships there. The guy knows how to win, knows how to play when the stage is the biggest. Even though it's not the NBA, nonetheless, winning becomes a habit, and rising to the occasion in a championship series is helpful. So I think some intangibles are attractive there, but it doesn't go very far in solving the main problem, which is the shooting problem.
Yes.
I mean, chemistry-wise, he was former teammates with Cousins and Davis. Won a national title with Davis. And, maybe he has refined his game just enough, because they don't need him to come back and be a different player, totally transformed. They just need him to be better. Dell Dem's, a lot of his own playing experience was in Europe, and he scouts Europe heavily. He seems comfortable with his handle on how performance in Europe translates to performance in the NBA.
Spurs have made a living on it.
Yep, and Dell Dem's came up through the Spurs organization too. And so, they don't have any major commitment to Miller. He may or may not make the team. He's got a camp invite after 3 productive seasons in Europe, and we'll see what happens. Right,
but again, because of the cap constraints, that may be a forced issue because he's not going to be getting a lot of salary. Guys, what's interesting, I mentioned the players that were involved in at least rumored to be in the trade: Pondexter, Moore, and Agenza. But you still got Omer Asik. You got Solomon Hill, who seemed to be a little, Asik is well overpaid. Hill is slightly overpaid by NBA standards right now. The question is, what happens there? Right now, there's a lot of talk about Carmelo Anthony maybe going to Houston. They're trying to be able to set up a 4-team deal. I've always said that this is where the Pelicans can dump salary. These salaries have to match up. If you got a team that's already over the luxury tax threshold and they need to make this thing work, that may be a situation where maybe the Pelicans are able to, put one of these guys in one of these bad contracts involved in this, and maybe you get back somebody that you can ultimately utilize, even if it's only for a season or two, that can give you something you need, whether it's going to be ball handling or shooting.
Well, I think they would like to be able to move Omer Asik's contract. I think that would be helpful, and anything they got in return that contributed would probably be Lanyap. He has virtually no role on this team, and if they can, and I think you're right, that's probably their best opportunity to move him, would be to help as a final piece to a puzzle of a bigger trade. If they can do that, it would be a big bonus for him.
Yeah, and other than that, some experts we've had on this show, on my radio show, said this is not the year to mess with it. You're over the cap. You want to keep him here. You'll stretch him. You're going to stretch him. You're going to stretch him next year. And when he only has 2 years left on his deal, or there may be more palatable out there for teams that are taking a Omer Asik with just 2 years left on the deal rather than in the 3 years at this point. For a guy that, again, at the end of the season was, he had the viral infection, the bacterial infection, and didn't even see the floor.
Well, yeah, his contract is just really hard to move. He's just hard to move right now because there's too much left on it, and no one knows what he's going to amount to the remainder of his career. If you're an optimist, you say, well, he didn't put any mileage on his legs last year.
Right.
And if he does come back, kind of healthy and with that kind of wake-up call where this is it, like my career is over if I don't start producing now. He doesn't have a role in this team, like you say, as long as AD and Cousins are healthy, but they might not be healthy every game, and the schedule is a grind, and they're going to need somebody to relieve one or the other guy at some point in the year. Right. So, it's just going to either be him or Ajinça.
Right. And that's what's scary about this, Brett, because, you look at it and you'd say, well, I'm going to have a guy that's going to come in and back up both Cousins and Davis. Ajinça is probably the guy you're looking at. What they're setting up is for their center to play more outside than inside. Then again, in the low post, they want him at the high post. They want him at the 3-point line. I mean, Ajinça has a nice shot. I mean, that's something he can do. Defensively, obviously, he leaves a lot to be desired, but that's what he does. And the salary is not prohibitive when you talk about his salary as compared to some of the other salaries on this roster. Check Diallo, again, as he develops, we'll see how he works out there. But, I mean, yeah, you're right. At some point, somebody's going to get injured. To me, I think Omer Ashik's future is in Europe. I think he maybe, if he wants to play some more basketball, he probably plays it overseas more than in the NBA.
Yeah, in Turkey, which is where he's from.
Right, no doubt.
Actually, the new NBA timeout rules, I think, hurt a guy like Ashik, who, like, if he were healthy, you could sub him in a late game defensive situation, then take him right out.
Right.
When you get the ball back, and they have, I think, one fewer timeout in the last 2 minutes.
Yes, they changed the rules there.
So, yeah,
no doubt. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. Our guests tonight, Les East and Brett Martel. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Quick break. We're going to talk some Saints when we get back. Again, don't forget, as always, this show is a live broadcast every Thursday night at 6. We have a rebroadcast on Friday night at 10 right here on WLE and on Pelican Sports Television, 9 o'clock every Friday night. We'll be right back.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Amco Fence, locally owned and operated since 1976. Fully licensed and insured and a member of the BBB, Amco serves both residential and commercial customers. If you're looking to repair, replace, or install a fence for security or aesthetic reasons, Amco Fence supplies wooden, metal, chain link, vinyl, and ornamental or automatic gates. Amco aims to satisfy your fencing needs. Amco Fence, 504-468-9559 or AmcoFenceCompany.com.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. Our guest tonight, freelance journalist, award-winning journalist Les East and Brett Martel of the Associated Press. Guys, before we move to the Saints, final question on the Pelicans. As the roster stands today, playoff team?
I would say no.
Brett?
Yeah, I think they are a playoff team. The problem is that they're probably not in the top 6.
Right.
Unless, if some other team that's supposed to be in the top 6 has the same injury problems that they've had the last 2 years and they stay healthy.
Sure.
And if, say, they pick up Rondo and he works out. Because I personally was, having grown up in New England, I probably watched and scrutinized the Celtics more than any of the other 29 teams I don't cover. Obviously, living and working here, I'm mostly focused on the Pelicans. But I thought one of the biggest changes in that series where the Celtics were able to come back after losing the first 2 games was Rondo's injury. So, he still has potential to be a factor.
And look, he played well for the Bulls, especially in the playoffs. They were playing well until he hurt his thumb. He seemed to have turned it around a bit over there. Out of all the guys that were out there in terms of stopgap guys, I felt Rondo would be the nice fit here in New Orleans. As I mentioned before, him and Boogie Cousins, very, very close. Sacramento, obviously know each other from Kentucky. They seem to be recruiting Kentucky players for this team. It is what it is. Now, what you get in Jackson is obviously a guy that's a little bit younger, as we mentioned, 27. He's a combo guard. He can play both sides. He can score. You hope that tendonitis is not going to be a problem with the knee. But, man, the $51 million over 3 years is the thing that really kind of scares you because this roster is so top-heavy in terms of the cap. Let's shift gears to the New Orleans Saints. They start camp in less than 2 weeks. And, Guys, just an overall before we kind of get into specifics. As you sit here today, what do you think about this team? Well, we know the NFC South's gotten better. Have they gotten better to the point that this is a playoff team with the current roster, in your opinion?
I think they've gotten better. I think they have a chance to be a playoff team. They're in what might wind up being the most competitive division in the NFL, so that will make it kind of difficult. The early schedule, those first 4 or 5 games, is really tough. They need to come out of that with a plus 500 record, I think, which has not been their strong suit of late. They've lost a couple of key players here during the offseason due to health issues, but I think there's every reason to think they will continue to be just as good on offense, maybe even a little better, simply because they can be a little more balanced and maybe possess the ball a little bit longer, which I think will help a defense that's trying to grow into a more serviceable unit. I think the addition of Mike Nolan is something that's really flown under the radar. I think he's going to help not only as a position coach, but also helping Dennis Allen as the coordinator. And I think the talent they brought in on defense means they will be better on defense. The problem is they have to be a lot better on defense. So I think they'll be better. I think they'll do better than the 7-9 they've done each of the last 3 years. But it's still going to be a challenge to get in the playoffs going through that early schedule and that division.
Your thoughts? Playoff team? Have they gotten good enough to be a playoff team this year, in your opinion, as we sit here today?
Yeah, I don't know, because I would have said, I mean, the outlook would have been a lot better if Nick Fairley was totally healthy, and now he's not playing at all, coming off the best season of his career. And then, we'll see what happens with Ryan Ramczyk. I remember, and obviously they'll need him to play well as a rookie because of Teron Armstead's issue.
Yes.
Because Armstead might not be back until mid-November, December.
And Brett, I
might not
think
be back at all.
That's ambitious. I really don't think he's back this year.
Might not be back at all. So I remember from draft night, we all asked questions of Sean Payton about the picks, and in the first round they got Ramczyk at the end of it. And there was almost a combative undertone in Payton's voice in talking about how they had him projected as a mid-first round player, not lower first round player. So of course they picked this guy, and how could anybody question it? And if he's right, then they could be much better off on the offensive line than we currently think they look.
Yeah.
And that could be a big difference. And of course, Sheldon Rankins, if Onyemata progresses,
yes,
and then obviously you have to have Okafor kind of pan out on the edge. Then maybe the secondary looks better. They could steal some games, and it could be like a 2006 situation where nothing. They're not expected to be the top first or second team in the division, but they pull out some wins and they emerge.
I'm cautiously optimistic, guys, and I've talked about it on this show, on my radio show before, when you have arguably 4 of your top 10 players that are injured right now, okay? 2 of those guys are not coming back, in Armstead and Fairley. When you look at the situation with Unger, unknown whether he'll be back for week 1. First it was the start of preseason, and then it's the end of preseason, now it's week 1. Daniel Ellaby, again, even though they've added a lot of bodies back at the linebacker position, when he's healthy, he's the best linebacker on this team. And I think you're already starting from a negative with that. A little stroke of luck, maybe a stroke of genius with going out and getting a Ryan Ramczyk, who now, again, is probably going to be your left tackle. I don't know if you move Pete again. Let him go to unless he's going to be unless you can't count on Armstead for the rest of his career, and Pete's going to be your left tackle. I don't think you move him again. And Ramczyk has played that position at Wisconsin, so again, why not put him out there? And you see now again, you've got you don't have the most experiences you've had on that left side. You're adding again Wolford to the right side, and you got to hope Unger comes back because Josh Arebus at this point that doesn't seem too palatable to me. And the main thing you got to do is protect Drew Brees. So to me. Again, I'm optimistic they're going to be better. I'm optimistic they're going to be a playoff team, but I think they're already behind the 8 ball a little bit with the injuries to key players, arguably some of the best players on your team. But again, I think they've tried to add talent to the positions where they were weak. I like Okafor. I think Okafor is going to give them the outside pass rush. 1-year contract, playing for that next deal, a guy that is going to really fit in. If Kakaha can come back healthy, or you can find someone on that other side, you won't miss Fairley as much because you move Jordan inside. And look, we talked about it before. Sheldon Rankins was supposed to be Nick Fairley before Fairley panned out here. So you got to believe that Rankins healthy can still give them the inside force they were hoping for. And Onyemata was a pleasant surprise last year. You hope that he'll continue, and Davidson has been very, very solid. So defensive line is there. You just have to be better in the secondary, right? Just because those guys had got to play a lot of minutes last year for this team because people were healthy, and you've added some talent back there. And again, you put so many more bodies at the linebacker position that you figure they got to be better there at that point. Les, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I do think there's every reason to believe the defense will be better. The question is the degree to which they'll be better. I agree with you. I think they did a good job of addressing their needs in the offseason as best they could. The one thing that stood out was that they did not get a proven pass rusher out of the draft, but I think that was mainly because the right guy wasn't there at the time they were getting ready to pick. And I think you got to give them credit for being disciplined enough not to reach for somebody just because it was a position of need. I think Okafor can do a lot to upgrade that area. I do think, everybody worries about injuries. Everybody's going to be affected by injuries. But given the way they were affected, especially at the cornerback position last year, if it reverts to the mean and they just have normal injuries, especially at the cornerback position, I think that makes a big difference in the secondary. So if they can keep those guys healthy at the cornerback position, I think that helps a lot. I do think they have a lot of versatility in the front seven, moving linemen inside and out, playing different combinations between the line and the linebackers. And so I think there's a lot to work with there, a lot to be proven. Getting back to the offense just briefly, the one thing about Unger is, if Unger gets some playing time late in the preseason, is in the starting lineup at Minnesota, then I don't think that's a big deal. The problem with that is with Ramczyk probably being the left tackle, I think that's their preference, that he proves he can handle the spot. Then you have a position that's kind of going through a transition early in the year because you have a rookie starting in one spot, you have your center not coming back till late, and that offense, I think, is going to have to carry them through a front-loaded schedule.
And a new guard as well.
And a new guard as well. So a lot of transition going on in the offensive line at the beginning of the year, which figures to be the toughest part of the schedule. And that's a time when they need the offense probably to be at its best while the defense kind of figures it all out.
The offensive backfield seems very, very strong with the addition of Adrian Peterson. We don't know what they have in there. It'll be interesting to see how they utilize him to make sure that he's going to be available for 16 games, how much he will push Mark Ingram going forward. The addition of Kamara, in my opinion, maybe helps you a lot in terms of the lack of depth that you have at the wide receiver position. You get past the top four, and it's kind of iffy on that wide receiver position. But if Kamara is going to be a guy that you're going to utilize like you use with Sproles and Bush, he's going to get some of those catches. And again, that will, as long as you don't have any real severe injuries at wide receiver, you'll probably be able to mask any deficiencies there. And you got to figure at the tight end position, you're going to be just a little bit better, right? I mean, you can't come back and have the same type of year that they had last year at the tight end position. Your thoughts on the wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends? Well,
you brought up Peterson, and I was going to say that if the Saints do make the playoffs, that'll be a great story because, in 2009, I can think of a couple guys. I know it's a little awkward to talk about Darren Sharper, given his legal trouble, but he was a guy that was they got off the street at the end of his career, and he had a Pro Bowl, All-Pro year, really. And then Anthony Hargrove was another guy who had some personal problems, and he came in and played a good role in the interior line. And they won a Super Bowl because of, key contributions from guys you weren't expecting or guys that they kind of got in the twilight. And you could look at, so if you could look at maybe if Kikaha, is able to overcome the odds coming back from a, third ACL surgery, he would be one of those feel-good stories. Peterson, if he has a great year, would be one of those stories. And then, in terms of tight ends too, you're looking at guys coming off injuries. I mean, Hill and Ho'omana-Wanui.
Mm-hmm. Right. He's kind of unsung right now, even in the thought process, right?
So, and then Kamara, it's non-contact practices so far that we've been able to see, but he does look, I know he'd be a really good flag football player. I can tell you that right now. I mean, he's looked really good, and he's kind of wrong-footed some defenders and stuff like that. So we'll see what happens when the pads are on with him, but he's showing a lot of good potential.
Talk about the passing game.
Well, the quarterback's pretty good.
He's not bad, but on a one-year deal, and on a one-year deal where I think it is a prove-it-to-me deal, not prove-it-to-me Drew Brees on whether he's still got it, but prove-it-to-me New Orleans Saints that you can take the next step. And if he does move on, there's like an $18 million cap hit against the Saints. If he stays, there's still that cap hit, plus they got to pay him even more. So it's still a roll of the dice with that. But pardon me for interrupting.
No, it's, there's a lot to sort out after the season. But as far as Drew Brees is concerned. But when you look at what they put around him, first of all, Michael Thomas just has that look of a superstar.
Yes.
You can tell a lot by body language, the confidence, the way he carries himself, the way he practices. He's so precise. He's so good. Like you hear lots of times, confident but not cocky. He has everything going for him. I think he's going to have a monster year. Those of you out there getting ready for your fantasy drafts, pick Michael Thomas up high. So I think, and with Ted Ginn, I think is a nice pickup. I think an adequate replacement for Brandon Cooks, even in a similar role.
More of a Henderson role now, right? Than Cooks did.
Yeah, not necessarily. Yeah, not identical, but a speedy guy who can get down the field, stretch the defense, open things up underneath. Willie Snead. So, I think the wide receiver core is going to be very good if they keep everybody healthy. The thing about Adrian Peterson, and as Brett pointed out, you can't tell much during minicamp and OTAs when they don't even have pads on. But it was just remarkable to me the way veteran NFL players gushed about Adrian Peterson, watching him run around in shorts, just saying, like, this guy is unbelievable. And I know he's 32 or he's going to be 32, and he's had 2 major knee surgeries. But 2 years ago, he led the NFL in rushing. And, sometimes those numbers, age, doesn't apply to certain people. Sure. And Adrian Peterson said, without hesitation, I'm one of those guys. Okay, I know who I am. And the way his teammates have gushed about him, I think that's a great low-risk, high-reward pickup. We'll see. Maybe he doesn't have a huge impact, but they have so much depth at running back. I think they're going to be well positioned at running back, even if he doesn't come through. But I think that's a guy to keep an eye on.
Well, yeah, Peterson, it's funny, all the great things they say about him, in some ways it doesn't mean anything because, even when he was younger, young players are just as susceptible to injuries as old players, but older players even more, and sometimes something happens that's totally out of his control. I guess there's also reason for optimism because I just, it would test a veteran guy's credibility to gush about Peterson in that way, knowing how old he is. I don't know if it's just a respect thing or, if it's guys who are kind of projecting to say, well, I want the benefit of the doubt when I'm his age too. It's really hard to know,
Well, maybe being enamored with a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yeah, right.
It's
right. And that does happen even at that level, So we'll have to see, but there are reasons for optimism with him. It's just that he's got to do it.
And I think the biggest thing with him is the intangible, pushing Mark Ingram. A Mark Ingram, when you light a fire under him, is a better back. When he had guys that were running more physical, the Chris Ivory's of the world, he ended up having to be able to, again, be a more physical back. Now, he's grown as a back. He's a more patient back. You can see he's much more patient than when he came into the league. He's a much better back than when he came out of the University of Alabama. But again, I've always felt that he's needed a player to push him to get the optimum out of him. And what better to push him than a first ballot Hall of Famer? And ultimately, we'll see. And again, the question is going forward, how does Peyton utilize it? Because you want him for 16 games. You want Peterson for 16 games. You don't want to be in a position where you're wearing him out early in the season. And with that combo, you won't have to do it, honestly.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why the signing makes sense is they don't need him to lead the league in rushing. They don't need him to carry the ball 20, 25 times a game. They need him to give them the kind of depth and versatility they had in 2009
yes.
when they had Pierre Thomas and Mike Bell and Reggie Bush. And if you look at the three guys now, they all have similar roles potentially. The only difference is one guy's a first ballot Hall of Famer, like you said. So they don't need a lot from Peterson, and I think the fact that Ingram is there takes some of the pressure off of Peterson, even though I think he's probably going to still look at himself as being one of the best running backs in the NFL. But I think you made a good point about Ingram is, you hear people talking about angry Ingram. He does seem to play better when something happens, Peyton benches him, or he has a bad game, or whatever happens. If something, you can just tell watching a game, you can say something got under his skin
when
today, he's going to have a big game.
Yes.
And I think just the mere presence of Peterson could do that on a daily basis.
And one last thing about Peterson is that Zach Strief mentioned something that, which makes him so interesting, is that he will see defensive fronts that he's never seen in his entire career, just fewer guys backed in the middle. And then you have the coach who's calling the plays is so good at getting players in space and isolating, mismatches or favorable matchups. And that's, to me, like almost the most intriguing thing is not only, can he stay healthy at his age, but what's he going to do in Peyton's offense?
Right. We haven't mentioned, I want to get to LSU, but Will Lutz is also a big key this year. And it looks as though what they've done in terms of the coaching staff changes, he seems to be, at least from all indication, you guys have seen him up close and personal at camp, he's hitting the ball well. He's mentally got it together, and which, again, is so big for a kicker. So, again, that could be a real plus going forward.
Yeah, and I think they did something interesting we saw at OTA and minicamp practices that they would have, like, managers stand near the line of scrimmage, and were they broomsticks? They were holding up something to potentially interfere with his kicks to get him to have a higher trajectory because he had some problems with that last year. So obviously they've identified what they think is a key problem. They have a creative way of addressing that. So that's one small thing that I think could be helpful. But I think you're right. The coaching changes are going to be one of the key factors this year. We'll see. We talked a little bit about the Pelicans having to develop talent from within. I think on defense, that has not been a strength of this coaching staff in recent years. If the changes lead to better player development among the youngsters, and there are a lot of young defensive players on this team, that would make a big difference. That's not something we're going to know about until the regular season starts.
I think that's a great point, Les, because I think that's one of the keys to this season. When you look at the change, obviously the defensive line coach, the linebacker coach, and of course now on the special teams side as well, guys that have been with Peyton for a long, long time, his confidants, letting those guys go, bringing in fresh eyes, bringing in a new voice, and bringing in teachers and former head coaches as well, which I think means a lot. I think that helps as well. Let's shift to LSU quickly. I'll take you first, Brett. Brett, what are your expectations of this upcoming season? It's all over the board for LSU. Some think they're going to have a tremendous season. Some think that they'll be middle of the road. The schedule is daunting when you got to play as many games on the road in the SEC as LSU does this year. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I would have moderate, really, expectations. With LSU, I mean, there's always the potential for a great year, and I certainly wouldn't want to discount that. But, as much optimism as there is about Danny Etling's health coming off back surgery, he still, doesn't look like a All-American, or hasn't looked like an All-American quarterback. He hasn't been really one of those stud quarterbacks in college yet, and may not be. They have a new offensive coordinator. They don't have much at receiver. The receiving game looked terrible in the spring game, but maybe that had a little bit to do with Etling's back. I don't know. And then, on defense, they lost some key guys: Adams, Beckwith,
some really good players on
Goshaw. Now Key's coming back, so at least they have him.
Right, but unknown when he'll be back now.
Yeah, right, because of shoulder surgery. And then Geis, I think we were talking about it before the show. I think that whole offense is going to have to revolve around Darius Geis. Because he's clearly the best player on the offense right now. It's not, no receiver. DJ Shark, it's like, Last year he was effective, but that's because there were two other guys that were the defense was more focused on. So you have to see how that pans out.
The spotlight on him.
Yeah,
no doubt.
So.
Les, your thoughts?
Well, I agree with what Brett said. There are a lot of question marks and a lot of wild cards with this team. I think there will be enough talent to have a good year, but there are a lot of question marks that have to be answered. Matt Canada coming in as a new offensive coordinator, I think that's a good hire. You look at what he did with Pittsburgh's offense, which a couple of years ago was no better than LSU's in terms of the passing game. And he turned it around significantly. The problem is he has so little to work with at wide receivers in terms of proven players. DJ Chark did have a good year last year overall, but there's very little experience besides that. So I think that's a big question mark. Darius Geis is going to be a huge part of this team, should be behind a pretty good offensive line. Quarterback, at this point, they don't appear to have a playmaker right now in the starter's role like they've been trying to get for several years now. Now, Etling may be a better game manager than they've had in recent years, which is helpful. But in order for this offense to be really effective, I think there are a lot of question marks that almost all have to be answered positively. A lot of key players lost on defense. A lot of talent there, but they're counting on a lot of untested players. And then you go, I believe, to Alabama, Florida, and Tennessee, among other places. So, and Ed Orgeron and his staff taking over for the first full season, I would hope, I know this is sometimes difficult for a lot of LSU fans, but I would hope there's a little bit of patience there because this is probably not going to be a team that's going to beat Alabama and play for the SEC championship, but that doesn't mean they aren't headed in the right direction.
Well, and it'll be interesting if the fans have patience, because it's really a 36-month experiment with Coach O. I think the big keys here are, again, Aranda and Canada. We know Aranda is a proven commodity. We know what he's done. If Canada can be that same type of guy on the offensive side to get the maximum out of the players that he has, I think that'll go a long way. And then, again, the final piece of that puzzle is when the rubber hits the road and when you got the hat on for real, can Coach Orgeron be that CEO and allow the coach to coach? It was easy to do it last year when you were an interim guy. Can you do it now when, again, you know you're on the line? At the end of the day, the W's and L's are in your column, and ultimately you're going to be held accountable for what happens on the field.
Well, and another thing, just real quick, is, last year he came in early in the season. Everybody had seen what Les Miles could do for like 11 years. And so he had the luxury of being able to throw a lot of curveballs at people with game plans. Now people are going to have a better idea of what to expect from him going in, and I think opponents will be better prepared for what he's going to try and do.
Right. 15 seconds.
Yeah, I just think that I'm glad Coach Orgeron's back just as a journalist, just because it's such a great story to have somebody who's representative of the culture that has supported LSU throughout its history, so long. If he's able to be a better CEO, and it works, it'll be a heck of a story.
No doubt about it. Brett Martel, Les East, thanks for being on our panel tonight. Thanks for watching. Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLE at 10 p.m. Also on Cox 130. That's tonight, Thursday nights at 10 o'clock. 2 a.m. on Saturday morning on Cox 130. And, of course, you can always catch us statewide Friday nights at 9 o'clock on Pelican. Catch me on the radio, 990 a.m. WGSO. That's 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. weekdays. You can listen live, download podcasts at ericasher.com. The TuneIn Radio app is a great way to take the show with you anywhere. And also, you can download every show at ericasher.com as well. Special thanks to our guests, Les East and Brett Martel. Also to the WLE production staff, Ron Yeager, Jim Dawson, Kenny Juno, Naila Jones, and Troy Lopez, and my director, William Hill. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you next week for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports.